I'm going to quickly introduce you then so that we don't lose any precious time and launch you right into your presentation if you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Sara Reed is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She is the CEO of Mind's Eye Health Solutions, a digital health company that provides evidence-based and culturally responsible mental health services for underserved groups. Sara was the first Black therapist to provide MDMA-assisted psychotherapy in a clinical trial, and she engages in ongoing advocacy work around health equity in psychedelic medicine. Sara, we are absolutely delighted to hear from you today, and I'm going to disappear and send the stage over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Erica, for that kind introduction. And good day, everyone. I'm sending a warm welcome from a very cloudy and rainy Kentucky. And I just want to say that it's an honor to share space with each of you today. And my heart is really glad to be here. And much gratitude to the Chacruna team for putting on this incredible event, honoring these sacred plants, the people who work with them, and medicine work both in the traditional and non-traditional settings. And I just want to take a moment to just really settle in this space to honor the ancestors and elders who paved the way for me, who've paved the way for us to be here, and the journeys that led us to each other in this exact space and time. May we continue to be in community with those who uplift us and protect the land for generations to come. Thank you. So I'm very excited to present on this topic titled Mainstreaming Psychedelics, the Shadows, the Spiritual, and the Service. And there's a bit of ground that I'd like to cover in this time that we have together. So I'll go ahead and get started, but also just want to name that I had a very beautiful PowerPoint presentation that really supported this talk, but due to some technical challenges, that presentation is not going to be shown today, but nonetheless, I think this will prove for a very live discussion. So I first want to dedicate this talk to some of the most incredible humans I've met to date who just so happen to do incredible justice work in the psychedelic medicine field. And so to Ritika Argwal, Ismail Ali, Camille Barton, and Natalie Ginsberg, you each have taught me so much about this field and have embraced me as a newcomer. I can say with certainty that I would not be the same person I am today without your encouragement, support, and guidance. We have strategized together, cried together, led together, loved together, and helped one another. I love each of you deeply and will be excited for the days to hug you again. As I was in meditation on how to deliver this talk, it was clear to me that I should use my experience as a participant in a MDMA-assisted psychotherapy research trial, where I took MDMA in a one-time therapeutic setting as part of the MAPS therapist training. And this experience will serve as a backdrop to help us explore some of the challenges and opportunities as psychedelics go mainstream. So I'm going to be storytelling a bit in this presentation, and the presentation is somewhat organized like a dosing session. So I'm going to start with my ascend after I ingest the medicine and the medicine starts to make connections with my mind, body, spirit, and then I'll move on to shadow work. Then I will end in service before we open up the space for Q&A. And it's really my hope that the Q&A section can be used as a space for us to really strategize together on how we can collectively move this needle forward in justice work as psychedelics go mainstream. And I also want to give a bit of a trigger warning here, because the stories that I'll be sharing will be some stories from racialized trauma. And I'll be talking a little bit about death. And I just want to be sensitive to the time and space that we're in right now. So certainly do what you need to do to take care of yourself, whether it is muting my audio, drinking some water, taking some breaths, touching your heart, to just stay in your body as we go through my journey. So let's get started. I feel like I'm dying, but it's okay, I say with a smile on my face. As I lie on the couch with 2 therapists by my side, I am constantly checking the clock, trying to follow my ascend. That is, trying to figure out the moment when the ordinary becomes the non-ordinary. And I was able to at first, but there was a moment where time sped up. And it was certainly an indescribable experience, but it felt like my body, my mind, and my spirit were making real connections with the medicine. And I'm observing for a bit these connections, and my body begins to speak, each cell becoming more energized and more attuned to the drug, ready for a deeper knowing of what it means to be human. My mind, however, seemed to be a bit stuck and repetitive, looping on narratives of the past, making sure that I keep it together on my journey, to make sure that I keep it together for my therapist. After all, this is part of my therapist training, right? I am a participant in a clinical trial. But soon enough, the drug sneaks past my mind's defenses, past my reflexive tendency towards control and precision, and catapults me to a place of dissolution. I let the medicine and the music carry me away, and shortly thereafter, my deceased grandmother appears, imparting her wisdom not only for me, but for my mother. We shared a beautiful yet brief moment. Tears of love flowed down my face, and joy filled my heart. She carried me to a place I knew existed but never seen, a place that felt so familiar but so distant, and I called that place home. I had traveled to the essence of the universe, into a space of divinity, and I finally had a place where I belonged. And for the first time in my life, in my adult life, I felt free. Me, a young Black woman, free. I had transcended the political realities of my race and gender and ascended to something greater. I got to be human. And I continued to climb higher energetically, spiritually, and I start to notice the heaviness of my body, that my body was slowing me down. And, wearing 2 hats in this experience, not only as a participant, but as a therapist in training who was curious about the onset effects of this drug, I asked my therapist if there were any techniques that I could do to help my body keep up. And little did I know that coming back into this body, this Black body, this Indigenous body, sitting with the painful internalized stories of not being enough, sitting with other experiences of racialized trauma would be the bulk of my work. Those defenses that helped me navigate this white American world in order to survive were dissolved. So now I am raw and open, flooded with emotions, flooded with the stories and the memories of my past and my ancestral past. My cells remembering these stories, remembering the racism, the sexism, the rapes, the silence. Remembering the constant fight of what it takes to stay alive in this body. Now we're going to transition a little bit. So to talk about shadow work. So I want to start off with a quote from the psychiatrist Carl Jung. And give me one moment while I pull this quote up quickly. All right. So that quote reads, "Filling the conscious mind with ideal conceptions is a characteristic of Western theosophy, but not the confrontation with the shadow and the world of darkness. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And I chose this quote because too often in our conversation on mainstreaming psychedelics, we often talk about the power and the potential of this medicine work, not about the shadows that we face. Like the shadows, like the harms vulnerable folks have already experienced in clinical research. Like in the 1950s and early 1960s, there was an agency that gave mind-altering drugs to hundreds of unsuspecting Americans in an effort to explore the possibilities of controlling human consciousness. And in one case, a mental patient in Kentucky was dosed with LSD continuously for 174 days. Or shadows we face, like how mental illness has been weaponized or used to justify the misuse of psychedelic substances. For example, with Elijah McCain, who died after being placed in a chokehold by police and was sedated with ketamine by paramedics with the justification of excited delirium syndrome. Or shadows we face, like how capitalism is taking over medicine work, how colonizing practices are entering the field, meaning that there are folks who sit in ceremony and extract the practices and wisdom from indigenous folks and attempt to replicate them and take ownership of them and use them in medicalized settings and profit off of them. Or folks who prey upon plant medicines, believing that they can extract certain molecules from these organisms and patent them or use them for profit. And they think that they can reduce these plants to molecules in chemistry and that the medicine work will have the same effect. These shadows aren't just going away. We always have to answer to our shadows, whether we realize it or not. Instead of trying to silence them, we can use them as a way to guide us and help us live more honestly and truthfully. Encountering our individual and collective shadow can help us be more human, more humane, and lead us to places beyond our conscious mind. To illustrate, I'll return back to my story and talk about the spiritual. So it's important to mention here at this point in my talk that this dosing session that I had where I took MDMA in a one-time clinical setting happened on Good Friday, a Christian holiday that had and still has spiritual significance for me. That death is part of life. That death is one of the many faces of life and symbolizes a new beginning. And for me, my ego death or dissolution helped me not only to transcend the parameters of this reality and allowed me to connect with my grandmother, to connect with divinity, but it also opened me and exposed me to energies that were foreign to me. So I'm in my dosing experience, sitting with these raw stories of my past and my ancestral past, going through this journey work as best as I can. And there came a moment where I encountered this floating energy, an energy that I had encountered in a dream state the night prior. It's a bit hard to describe the image that I saw, but it seemed to be polluted, an energy with lots of holes. And if you spread the energy out, it transformed to a pattern that's unknown to me. An energy that seemed to have latched on to my body, but it didn't belong to me. So there I was observing this energy, not afraid, but just watching it. And I share, to the best of my abilities, my findings with my therapist. And the next thing I know, I'm physically standing up, confronting this energy. And I began chanting in an indigenous language that my mind doesn't know. And after some chants and silence, my body caves in and slowly moves to the floor. Although my body was safe, it felt like a spiritual collapse. I had reached a state of perception for which I had no language. And I find that it's so important for us to continue conversations about spirit and put spirit first as we continue to move towards medicalizing psychedelic-assisted therapies. It is flat out arrogant and disrespectful to attempt to reduce the magnitude of what happens in medicine work to numbers, chemicals, and methodologies. What about the magic that is inherent to the work? The mystery that's an active participant in these sessions? What about spirit that often calls us to this field of work or to these medicines for healing? It's time for us to integrate these conversations more fully into the mainstream. Thank you, Chakruna, and to all of the researchers who recognize this importance. It's also important for us to continue advocating for the need for culturally responsible training, particularly including how to help patients or participants navigate the spiritual territory that often comes up in this work. And we need to integrate this knowledge more into the clinical trainings. I can tell you more often than not, I've had to help patients navigate something beyond the rationale in these dosing sessions, even in integration sessions as well. And it was my own spiritual practices that helped me to help them. And the last piece that I'll mention regarding the spiritual is the challenges that I see when there's an attempt to pathologize the spiritual. And what I mean here is that there are some things we will encounter in medicine work that are beyond the rationale. And to attempt to rationalize or pathologize is a waste of energy. And it could actually be harmful to those patients or participants that might be having these spiritual experiences. And to be clear, my therapist didn't pathologize what happened to me. What I'm saying is that we have to be mindful about not always pathologizing a person's process, especially in psychedelic medicine, because pathology in practice can undermine a person's lived experience. Okay. And I'm going to take a sip here. All right. So the last piece that I will touch on today is service. So let me return again to my story to illustrate. So I felt pretty exhausted after the spiritual experience that I had. And I spent majority of that dosing session trying to regain my energy, using a lot of body-based techniques to help me regain my energy, utilizing a lot of indigenous practices to help me regain my energy as well. And it might sound very cliche, but this experience changed the trajectory of my life from a participant to a therapist to an activist or an advocate. I certainly have felt a calling to ensure that other folks of color have safe, culturally informed experiences in psychedelic research, because inadequate training on cultural competence could harm participants and widen the gap for health disparities. And it has significant ramifications, not only for participants, for but for the efficacy and the integrity of clinical research. In psychedelic-assisted therapy trials, participants are required to be in very vulnerable states as they attempt to process some of the most difficult memories of their past. If clinicians are not sensitive to the landscape of a participant's cultural experience, they can easily misinterpret, dismiss, or ignore critical information that is necessary for a participant's therapeutic process. So for me, what this looks like in practice these days is pouring into my business titled Mind's Eye Health Solutions. So we are a mental health tech and service company that seeks to explore the questions of how do we reimagine mental health treatment in the digital era? Or how do we make mental health treatment more accessible, but not just financially accessible, but culturally accessible, linguistically accessible? And how do we make changes to the mental health field for clinicians to live more sustainably in service work? Because if you've been attuned to what's happening, at least now stateside, clinician burnout is quite high, that there's lots of waiting lists for folks to get treatment because therapists are at capacity. So I feel like we're at a really interesting time to really begin to rethink about what mental health treatment means, and to make mental health treatment actually more effective and more relevant to the landscape of the experiences that people have. So for us, what this looks like is offering tech-based solutions and clinical services through group-based models of care. And we believe in the power of healing in community and are developing our first, I'm gonna do a dance on that one, holistic health clinic in the Southern United States, which is a geography that is historically underrepresented in psychedelic medicine treatment. We are also committed to honoring the healing that happens in traditional or ceremonial or even recreational settings, and hope to provide folks with the education and support to have safe and meaningful psychedelic experiences. And to go on a tangent a bit here, when we talk about accessibility in psychedelic medicine, we often limit the conversation to accessibility to medicalized settings. And what we advocate for at Mind's Eye is to provide folks with the education and resources to have safe experiences with psychedelics. Because, you know, the reality is there are some people who, once these drug-assisted therapies get approved, that there are going to be some folks who are going to go the clinical route, who are going to go the medicalized route, because they have the insurance or they have the financial means to be able to afford this treatment. But the reality is that there are other folks who are going to be engaging in medicine work outside of that medicalized setting. And to me, it's important that folks who are ready to engage in those experiences have the education around what medicine work is, how to create their own settings, how to test their drugs, how to create safety containers for themselves. And the reality is, this is already happening. I do supervision at my old clinic in Tallinn, Connecticut. Shout outs to Behavioral Wellness Clinic. And I can't tell you how many of the therapists talk about clients that they have who have watched documentaries about psychedelics that are on Netflix or that are on other platforms, and want to try psychedelics themselves or want to microdose themselves. And they're looking for integration of these experiences already. So to me, it's important as we continue this conversation around accessibility, around mainstreaming psychedelics, that we think about the systemic impact of what mainstreaming psychedelics will have. So our company is looking at these issues as we continue to move forward and develop the business. And I could spend the rest of the day talking about the shifts that are important to make in business practices if folks are interested in the field. But in the interest of time, I am only going to name a couple before I end here and open up the space for Q&A. So, I call all entrepreneurs in this space, or those who are about to enter this space, to consider a relational approach to business versus a transactional approach to business as it relates to business or service models when engaging with care. And I originally got this concept from Edgar Villanueva's book titled Decolonizing Wealth, Indigenous Wisdom to Heal Divides and Restore Balance. And I highly recommend everyone listening to read this book, as it provides some really wonderful insights on business and philanthropy. So what is a relational approach in psychedelic medicine, you ask? Well, for me, it means actually having a relationship with the medicines that you work with, having a relationship with the people that you are seeking to treat, and yeah, really just examining your intentions, because I think what we're seeing a lot now in the business space with psychedelics is that there are a lot of serial entrepreneurs who are coming into the space who don't have clinical backgrounds, who are white men, if we just want to name it, and who don't have this connection, but who see dollar signs. And of course, this is not a generalized statement. I'm not saying all entrepreneurs in this space do that, but I think you can tell the difference between business models or companies that are based on transactions and that are seeking to be first in the market versus business that have a more of a relational approach to this medicine work. So I just invite folks to consider that piece. And I could say more about this, but I will pause there and close here by saying, going through my MDMA-assisted psychotherapy experience showed me many things about the world we live in and my position in it. It showed me the damage from colonialism, the residue from my past traumas. It also, however, gave me a glimpse of what lies beyond the political realities of this life, and that's freedom. And as we continue in service to the work, it's important to remember that, and I quote, "The story cannot be told well except through the entire community." And this is a quote by Frederick and Marianne Broussard. It's critical to include the voices of Black and Indigenous folks and other folks of color as we continue the journey in mainstreaming psychedelics. And I had a picture to share that showed some of the folks of color who attended the MAP's first ever training dedicated to training therapists who work in communities of color. And I just thought it was important to share that picture just to provide a visual of the community that's already doing this work, this justice work that's really helping to make this field more inclusive and to remain grounded in the principles that I think help to create the containers for this healing work. So how do we honor the sacred in science? Well, one way is to incorporate and acknowledge the spiritual. How do we confront the collective shadow in this work? By each of us doing our parts, by showing up just as we are and doing the work, whatever that means to us. And how do we decolonize psychedelic medicine without appropriating other cultures? Now, I don't have an exact answer to that one, but I will say consent and consultation are important parts of the process. And perhaps considering changing the way we talk about the work, moving from away from the term psychedelics back to its origins, medicine work. Thank you. And now we can open it up for questions, comments, reflections. I am very curious to see what's been going on.
Thank you. Sorry, I was stuck in a loop there trying to get back on the moderator screen. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that inspiring and really incredibly moving talk. You really showed us so much of yourself and really, I think, are such an important voice in this conversation. There are many questions, and I remind everyone to join Sara, if Sarah's willing, in the connection room afterwards, because I suspect we may not get through all of the questions in the minutes we've got here. I'm going to start with a question from Marcus Mars, though. Marcus asks, what was the dose and the duration of your session? And was it a single dose or was it increased over time? And what was your experience reconnecting with shared reality in the days? Thank you.
Ooh. Okay, thank you so much for that question. So the dose was 120 milligrams, the initial dose, and then I took a supplemental dose after that. So I think it was 180 milligrams total. And the total session length was eight and a half hours. And I enjoy talking about this experience because I still am continuing to integrate from that experience, which happened in 2017. And yeah, that experience has taught me a lot about ancestral work and intergenerational healing and connections and really connecting with my ancestors. But I'm someone who I feel like I've begun, how do I say this? Or let me rephrase. I have always felt a connection to spirit, even as a child, even a connection with plants and other organisms that have different states of consciousness. So to me, this was just a continuation of the journey, but just in a different container.
Thank you for that answer. And in the chat, there's so much love and so much support for your talk and your work and your essence. But I'm going to move on to another question. This one from Jason Bell, who asks, how can we follow up on your work? You're carrying a beautiful energy and express it with grace. We're interested in knowing, I'm going to say we are interested in knowing what you'll be up to in the years to come. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I will be sure to leave my contact info in the chat. So for folks who want to connect with me further, that they'll have a way to contact me. But for right now, my focus is on building my business, Mind's Eye Health Solutions, and really beginning to make psychedelic-assisted therapy treatments culturally responsible and accessible, specifically in the Southeast United States. So our first clinic will be hopefully starting in late summer, and we've already got some folks who are interested in the treatment. So be sure to, if you all are interested in treatment or interested in therapy training, to follow us on our website and subscribe to stay up to date.
That's wonderful. And hopefully we'll be able to provide that information in the chat. If not, we can follow up with you in the future. I don't know those technical details.
Yes, I will send my email and the link to the website in the chat right now.
Oh, fantastic. Multitasking. Is it all right if I ask you a question while you're doing
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. There's a question from KK who asks, how do you handle the inner work of overcoming scarcity mindset that is necessary to establish a relational model instead of a transactional model? Or does scarcity mindset not really come into it?
I love that. And I have to absolutely give a shout out to Kentucky, give a shout outs to my upbringing, because I come from a very rural area where there aren't a lot of resources there. So I've been exposed firsthand to what it's like to be in an under-resourced space. And Kentucky is a state that is still highly under-resourced. Folks aren't, investing in the state. There's a lot of trauma that exists in the state, which even led me to stop the medicine work that I was doing in Connecticut to come back home with the the senseless murder of Breonna Taylor, and being in this pandemic that I just felt like I needed to come back to see what I could do with the resources and the knowledge that I have to a community that gave me so much. So to answer the question just around the inner work around the scarcity mindset, yeah, I would say as part of being part of like a capitalist society, of course, like I have thoughts like about, oh, well, or at least my business partners remind me, but, is this going to make us money? Or, is this, I don't know if we should move this way, but I feel like I have to follow my heart. And really, if I'm going to exist in this business space, it has to be through a decolonized approach, period. And yeah, I would say just maybe doing some readings, exposing yourself to knowledge is a way to start. The book that I referenced, Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva, is a great resource that can provide more insight about more relational approaches and reciprocity.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to sneak in another couple of questions. This one comes from Melissa Maschitz, who asks, did you get your training from MAPS? And what are other ways to get training that you might recommend?
Yes. So I've been a part of 2 trainings. So for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, that was, I did get trained by MAPS. For folks who might not know, MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And I also received training in psilocybin-assisted therapy. And that was with some research work that I participated in at Yale University. Yeah, I definitely highly recommend doing your research on which training program might be a fit for you. I know the California Institute for Integral Studies, or CIIS, they have a psychedelic therapy training there that I think is more broad. So it's not just specific to MDMA or psilocybin. I think it's more inclusive of other medicine work in there. So I would say check in with yourself to see which medicine work, or which medicine you have a connection with, and which medicine that you want to work with, and then go from there.
Thank you. I think we have time for another question. This one comes from Krista Potenza. How do you identify a potential therapist to facilitate MDMA? So this might be a little bit related. What I mean is, how do you decide whether you want a certain therapist to guide you, or what things do you look for?
Yes. This is so critical because especially for folks who have multiple marginalized identities, the reality is not a lot of therapists are going to understand our cultural landscape and are going to be able to create the container for us in these settings. So I would say pay attention to the prep work. And what I mean by the prep work is if you are trying to engage in any medicine work and there is no prep work, that I would highly recommend, at least in the Western context, Western medicalized context, to not engage in that type of healing work, because there needs to be some type of attunement between you and the therapist before you're able to kind of go deep to go deep with them. And the relationship you have with your therapist absolutely will dictate how deep you go and where you go in your dosing sessions. So I would say if you have or if someone has experiences of, say, racialized trauma and the therapist hasn't brought up race at all in preparatory work, that's probably not going to be a good fit for you, because that therapist is not or may not know how to handle experiences of racialized trauma when they come up, or someone might be processing something deeply as it relates to their race, and the therapist might minimize the race or might, say things that are just incongruent to what the participant or the patient's experience is. So I would say pay attention to the preparatory work and trust your body, because I find often that I think in just therapy in general, we tend to be up here and less in here, and our bodies are sending us signals all the time. And of course, these signals can be related to trauma responses, but I try to encourage whenever I can to trust instincts, listen to that impulse, because most likely it's giving you that signal for a reason.
Excellent. I have so many questions that I want to ask, but I'm going to try to go back to our participants.
Yes.
Jennifer Nice asks, how can patients make the best of only having access to subpar psychedelic clinics, such as a cheap ketamine clinic with little interaction while dosing or little or no integration support? And thank you.
Yes. Could you repeat the first part again?
Sorry, how can patients having access to subpar psychedelic clinics?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So thank you for this question. And I would say integration, because integration, I feel, is just as important, if not more important, than the dosing sessions in and of themselves, because folks can have insights all day in these dosing sessions, but it's really the integration of the experiences into practice that really helps to produce the lasting changes that folks desire. And at least with the MAPS therapist training, or the MAPS MDMA therapy training protocol, that's why there are more integration sessions than there are dosing sessions, is to highlight the importance of integration. So I would say to find a good therapist, which unfortunately can, be a process in and of itself. Don't get discouraged by the process. If possible, to join a group. There are some integration circles that are already happening. I know the Sabina Project has an integration circle for folks of color. We're also going to be starting an integration circle soon to help folks integrate experiences. So focusing on integration, I think, can be a way to continue to develop what happened in dosing experiences.
Thank you so much. I know we're almost out of time. I'm going to see if I can sneak in my own question. But what I'm hearing you say loudly and clearly is, that we need a diversity of therapists, and we need a sort of diverse training models and diverse ways that people come to know psychedelics and bring that embodied knowledge into this conversation. And I guess talk is very inspirational on that note, and reminding us all to sort of look around in our communities and recognize the need for diversity in this community. And I don't know if you want to comment on that. That was just my thought that I wanted to put out in the dying moments. Thank you for this work.
Yes. The need for diversity is paramount, because, and I feel like especially within this past year, with the hypervisibility of the murders of Black Americans, that we are in a space where you see a lot of organizations and companies making these statements about diversity and inclusion and their stance, but they still don't have a lot of folks of color on there, you know, in executive positions. So it, you know, begs the question of like, is this lip service, you know, that folks are doing, or, you know, are they really like changing the infrastructure of their systems? And to be frank, it's really, really hard work to dismantle an organization that has worked really well for you. And to recognize the importance of diversity and inclusion, that it's not just you know, this trendy thing that, you know, folks are trying to hop on, that it's really about providing equitable care for folks, because there are severe ramifications if we don't start this work now, train more therapists of color, but also support them after they receive the training, because the training is not enough. We need to help them start clinics, develop clinics, maintain their clinics, which, you know, I think there are a group of change makers who are trying to be supportive of that work. So
I'm so happy to hear you answer that question. So
yes.
Thank you so much. I believe we're supposed to leave soon so that we can prepare for the next sessions. But again, a reminder to please check out the other features and hopefully join Sara in the connections room. And thank you so much for this very inspiring presentation. We're so honored to have you here. Thank you, Sara.
Yes, thank you all. Peace and
love. I'll clap on behalf of everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.